Hey guys, tonight we're taking a truly chilling journey across the vast, tumultuous, and utterly unforgiving expanse of the North Sea and the North Atlantic Ocean. The very highways of the Viking Age. Forget the romanticized images of daring longships gracefully cutting through calm waters, laden with treasure and crewed by fearless explorers. You're about to discover how Viking explorers really survived the North Sea, a grim reality where every voyage was a desperate gamble against monstrous waves, relentless cold, pervasive hunger, and the constant specter of death by shipwreck, starvation, or exposure. This wasn't a leisurely cruise or a guaranteed path to new lands. It was a brutal, relentless battle against the very forces of nature, a terrifying odyssey where survival was often a miracle, not a certainty. Frankly, you probably wouldn't survive the first major storm without wishing for a swift, painless disappearance, let alone an entire transoceanic journey. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from, and what time is it for you right now? Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself suddenly standing on a windswept fjord in Norway. Perhaps around the late 10th or early 11th century CE, the air is cold and sharp with the scent of salt and pine. Your longship, a magnificent vessel, its wooden hull gleaming, sits ready in the water. You are a Viking explorer, a Vikinger, filled with a mix of ambition, curiosity, and perhaps a desperate need for new land or plunder. You gaze out at the vast expanse of the ocean, stretching endlessly towards the horizon, promising new lands Iceland, Greenland, Vinland, North America, and untold riches. But the promise is inseparable from the peril. This is the fickle North Sea, a monstrous adversary, and its unpredictable nature is the constant, terrifying threat that defines every moment of your voyage. The North Sea and the North Atlantic were, and still are, some of the most challenging and dangerous waters in the world. Viking explorers embarked on journeys across these vast, frigid, and often storm-racked expanses using technology that, while revolutionary for its time, was still incredibly primitive by modern standards. Their reliance on rudimentary navigation, limited weather forecasting, and relatively small, open vessels turned every long-distance voyage into a high-stakes gamble with overwhelming natural forces. The weather was your most relentless and unpredictable enemy. Forget calm seas and sunny skies. The North Atlantic is notorious for its sudden, ferocious storms, capable of whipping up immense waves in mere minutes. Violent storms. Imagine a sudden gale hitting your longship. The ship would be tossed about like a toy, the wooden planks groaning, the single square sail shredding under the immense force of the wind. Waves, towering like mountains, would crash over your open deck, swamping the vessel, threatening to capsize you in an instant. You'd be desperately bailing water, clinging to the rigging, fighting for your life against the overwhelming power of the ocean. Many longships, with their crews and cargo, simply vanished in such storms, swallowed by the frigid depths, leaving no trace. This wasn't just discomfort, it was a terrifying, visceral fight for survival against a raging, indifferent, natural force. It truly sucked to be a human bob in a washing machine. Icy winds and freezing temperatures. Even outside of storms, the waters of the North Atlantic were perpetually cold, especially on voyages to Iceland or Greenland. Relentless, biting winds would cut through your woolen clothing, chilling you to the bone. Prolonged exposure to these freezing temperatures, especially if wet, led to constant risk of hypothermia. Your body would shiver uncontrollably, your limbs would grow numb, and your core temperature would drop, leading to confusion, exhaustion, and often silent death during sleep. Imagine your fingers going stiff with cold, making it almost impossible to grip an oar or a rope. Your body perpetually aching from the pervasive chill, fog, and low visibility. Dense fogs were common, particularly near ice-filled waters or in areas where warm and cold currents met. Imagine sailing for days in a thick, blinding fog, visibility reduced to mere feet. This made navigation incredibly dangerous, increasing the risk of running aground on hidden reefs, colliding with icebergs, or simply becoming hopelessly lost in the vast, featureless ocean, consuming precious supplies and leading to profound despair. You relied on your ears more than your eyes, straining to hear the distant sound of breaking waves or the cries of seabirds. It truly sucked to be perpetually blind at sea. Icebergs and sea ice. On voyages to Greenland or Vinland, you face the additional, terrifying threat of immense icebergs calved from glaciers, silent, deadly mountains of ice lurking in the fog or darkness, capable of crushing a wooden longship's hull in an instant. Vast expanses of sea ice could also trap a vessel for weeks, or force long. Perilous detours that exhausted vital supplies, leaving your crew vulnerable to starvation and exposure. Imagine trying to navigate a maze of colossal, silent ice monsters, always fearing a collision that would splinter your fragile wooden vessel and send you into the frigid depths. It really sucked to play dodgems with ice mountains. The sheer powerlessness of ancient sailors against these overwhelming forces was profound. You had no modern weather forecasts, no radar to detect icebergs, no sophisticated rescue services. Your survival depended entirely on the strength of your ship, the skill of your crew, the favor of the gods as explored in the horrifying superstitions that controlled a Viking's daily life, and sheer, terrifying luck. A single misjudgment, a sudden shift in the wind, or an unforeseen iceberg could doom your entire expedition in a matter of moments, with no hope of external intervention. The physical toll of constant exposure to these elements was immense. Your skin would be raw from salt spray and windburn. Your hands would be chapped, blistered, and perpetually cold. Your body would ache from constant bracing against the ship's movements and the relentless demands of rowing or managing sails in extreme conditions. Chronic fatigue, exacerbated by sleep deprivation in rough seas, would constantly gnaw at your resilience, making you more susceptible to illness and accidents. You were constantly battling nature, and nature rarely lost. The psychological impact of living under such unpredictable and terrifying conditions was equally profound. The constant fear of storms, of being lost, of running into ice, or of simply succumbing to the cold would create a pervasive sense of anxiety and dread. Your mind would be perpetually on edge, hyper-vigilant, scanning the horizon for signs of trouble. This relentless mental strain, coupled with the physical discomfort, would erode your peace of mind, leading to profound despair, melancholy, or a chilling fatalism. Your voyage was not just a physical journey, it was a profound psychological ordeal, a test of your courage and your sanity against the indifferent, or actively malevolent, forces of the sea. The sagas and archaeological records provide chilling evidence of these dangers. Many Norse sagas recount tales of ships lost to storms, of crews succumbing to exposure, or of desperate struggles against the ice. Archaeological discoveries of submerged Viking ships, or those found in remote, inhospitable locations, also bear silent witness to the perils of their voyages. The very term longship might evoke images of graceful power, but their open decks and reliance on sail and oar made them highly vulnerable in truly rough seas. One common misconception is that all Viking voyages were well planned, successful expeditions to rich, accessible lands. In reality, many voyages were speculative, exploring unknown waters, and a significant proportion of ships and crews were lost to the treacherous North Atlantic. The allure of new lands and plunder drove these expeditions, but the grim reality was that the ocean itself was a far more formidable adversary than any human foe. The risks were immense, and failure, death, or shipwreck was a constant, almost expected outcome. Historians still meticulously study paleoclimate data from ice cores, ocean sediments, and tree rings. Archaeological findings of shipwreck sites where identifiable, and Norse sagas like the Grenlandinga saga and Eric the Red's saga, which vividly describe terrifying storms, ice encounters, and harrowing voyages to reconstruct the precise environmental challenges and technological limitations that shaped Viking transatlantic exploration, consistently confirming the extreme dangers of these ambitious voyages. Furthermore, the limited space on a longship, as we'll discuss in Chapter 2, meant you were constantly in close proximity to your shipmates, sharing their fears, their anxieties, and any illnesses that might sweep through the crew. This communal endurance of hardship while fostering strong bonds also meant there was no escape from the pervasive atmosphere of struggle and uncertainty that defined your voyage. Your personal misery was amplified by the collective suffering, ensuring that your journey was a constant reminder of shared peril. The unpredictable nature of the sea also meant that sudden capsizing was a terrifying possibility. A rogue wave, a sudden shift in cargo, or a structural weakness in the hull could cause your longship to flip over, throwing you into the frigid, open water. Drowning or succumbing to hypothermia in minutes would be an instant, horrifying end, with little to no chance of rescue from the vast, indifferent ocean. Your life could be extinguished in a terrifying, chaotic instant, far from any land or help. So, your journey as a Viking explorer was a constant, terrifying battle against the fickle North Sea, a monstrous adversary that tested your endurance at every mile. The violent storms, the relentless cold, the blinding fog, and the lurking icebergs conspired to make every voyage a perilous dance with death. This pervasive environmental hostility, ensuring every moment was a struggle for survival against the untamed forces of nature, was the first, and perhaps most foundational, aspect of how Viking explorers really survived the North Sea. Having launched your longship into the vast, unforgiving expanse of the North Atlantic, your life as a Viking explorer was immediately defined by the very vessel beneath your feet, the longship. Forget romanticized tales of effortless sailing. This magnificent, seaworthy marvel was, in the open, stormy waters, a brutal test of endurance, profoundly horrifying in its surprisingly vulnerable nature and its utter lack of comfort. Imagine your new home for weeks, sometimes months on end. A Viking longship, a masterpiece of ancient shipbuilding, was designed for speed, maneuverability, and shallow drafts, making it ideal for coastal raiding and riverine travel. Its sleek, clinker-built hull, made of overlapping planks fastened by iron rivets, offered remarkable flexibility and strength in rough seas, but its very design, optimized for its primary purpose, presented profound challenges for its human occupants on long-distance voyages across the open ocean. It truly sucked to live in a floating log. The most immediate and pervasive discomfort was the lack of shelter and exposure to the elements. Viking longships, particularly the famous ones like the Gokstad or Oseberg ships, were primarily open-decked vessels. There was no enclosed cabin below deck for the entire crew, no secure, dry space to retreat from the brutal elements, you and your shipmates would be constantly exposed to relentless wind. The wind, a vital force for propelling your square sail, was also a constant tormentor, biting at your skin, chilling you to the bone, and carrying blinding spray. Driving rain and sea spray, waves would constantly crash over the bow and sides, drenching you and everything on board. You would be perpetually wet. Your rough woolen clothing, if you were lucky enough to have good quality wool, clinging uncomfortably to your skin, slowly leaching away your body heat. Drying out was often impossible for weeks on end, leading to chronic chills, skin infections, and profound misery. Freezing cold, the North Atlantic waters are notoriously frigid. Even in summer, the pervasive dampness, combined with sub-zero temperatures, especially during northern voyages to Iceland or Greenland, meant you were always battling hypothermia. Your limbs would grow numb. Your body would tremble uncontrollably, and severe frostbite was a constant risk for exposed fingers and toes, leading to permanent disfigurement or loss of digits. It truly sucked to be perpetually soaked and frozen. Scorching sun, paradoxically, even the sun could be an enemy. In clear weather, the intense sun beating down on an open deck, reflecting off the water, could cause severe sunburn, headaches, and rapid dehydration, especially if your fresh water supplies were limited. There was little shade or respite. Your only shelter might be a simple canvas tent or a hide awning stretched over a central part of the deck. This offered minimal protection from wind and rain, and certainly no insulation from the cold. At night, you and your shipmates would huddle together, sharing warmth, but also sharing dampness and any circulating illnesses, creating a cramped, miserable sleeping environment. The cramped living conditions on board were extreme. A typical longship carrying 30, 60 men, sometimes more for larger vessels like the Orman Lang, had virtually no dedicated living space. You would sleep on benches or simply on the deck itself, among your equipment, weapons, and cargo. Personal space was non-existent. You would be constantly surrounded by your shipmates, their unwashed bodies, their loud conversations, their snoring, and the pervasive smells of the ship itself, stale sweat, damp wood, stored provisions, and, often, human waste, as latrines were rudimentary or non-existent, often just a designated spot over the side of the ship. This constant, close proximity facilitated the rapid spread of diseases. It truly sucked to live in a human sardine can that reeked of stale sweat and fish. The lack of proper sanitation was appalling. Fresh water, a precious commodity, was hoarded for drinking, rarely used for washing bodies or clothes. Human waste would often be discharged directly into the sea from a designated head area at the bow, or collected in buckets that were haphazardly emptied, leading to constant contamination of the ship's decks and internal spaces. This created a breeding ground for bacteria and diseases. Imagine living for weeks or months in a perpetually damp, dark, and reeking environment, constantly itching from lice and fleas which thrived in unwashed bodies and clothing, with no escape from the pervasive filth. Your efforts at staying clean were futile, and the pervasive smell was an inescapable part of your existence. The monotonous and often insufficient diet, as explored in a previous episode. Why your daily food in the Viking Age utterly sucked exacerbated the physical strain. You would subsist on hardtack dry biscuits, salted or dried meat, fish, and stale water or weak ale. Fresh fruits and vegetables were almost non-existent on long voyages, leading to widespread nutritional deficiencies like scurvy, which we'll discuss later. This constant deprivation further weakened your body, making you more susceptible to illness and less resilient against the brutal conditions. The constant motion of the ship added another layer of misery. Even in relatively calm seas, the gentle rolling and pitching of the vessel could induce seasickness for some. In rough weather, the violent heaving, tossing, and crashing could lead to persistent nausea, vomiting, and profound discomfort, making it impossible to keep food down or find any stable footing. Imagine trying to eat, sleep, or simply exist while your stomach constantly rebelled against the relentless motion. It truly sucked to be perpetually seasick. One common misconception is that Viking longships were designed for comfort on long voyages. While they were incredibly effective for their primary purposes, raiding, warfare, and trade over shorter distances or along coasts, their open, flexible, and shallow draft design, optimizing speed and maneuverability, meant a significant sacrifice of crew comfort and protection from the elements. They were not built for luxury cruising across vast oceans. This fundamental design trade-off, prioritizing function over comfort, directly contributed to the harsh conditions endured by explorers. Historians still meticulously study archaeological findings of Viking longships like the Oseberg, Gokstad, and Skuldelv ships, analyzing their design, construction, and the absence of dedicated living quarters, as well as Old Norse sagas which often describe the harshness of sea voyages to understand the precise living conditions and challenges faced by crews on long-distance voyages. Furthermore, the very act of sailing and rowing was incredibly physically demanding. You would spend hours at the oars, battling currents or propelling the ship in calm conditions, managing the large square sail in unpredictable winds. Hauling ropes and bailing water were continuous, strenuous tasks. This relentless physical exertion, combined with the lack of proper rest, the poor diet, and the constant exposure, led to profound fatigue, muscle aches, and joint strain. Your body was perpetually pushed to its limits, ensuring that every mile gained was paid for with immense physical suffering. The cold water of the North Atlantic presented a constant threat. A rogue wave washing over the deck, or an accidental fall overboard, could quickly lead to death by hypothermia, even for strong swimmers, given the frigid temperatures of the ocean. This constant proximity to the cold, lethal water added another layer of inherent danger to your already brutal existence, ensuring that a single misstep could mean instant oblivion. The psychological toll of living in such cramped, unsanitary, and perpetually uncomfortable conditions would be immense. You would battle constant physical discomfort, pervasive odors, the irritation of parasites, and chronic fatigue, the lack of privacy, the inability to escape your shipmates, or the oppressive environment would erode your peace of mind. This relentless physical and sensory assault would lead to profound irritability, despondency, and a general sense of misery, transforming your ambitious voyage into a continuous test of endurance against your own body and its immediate surroundings. So, your journey as a Viking explorer was profoundly defined by your longship, a seaworthy marvel that was also a floating hell. The complete lack of shelter, constant exposure to extreme weather, pervasive filth and unsanitary conditions, meager diet, and relentless physical demands transformed your vessel into a cramped, miserable prison. This brutal endurance test, ensuring every moment at sea was a physical and psychological battle, was a defining, profoundly horrifying aspect of how Viking explorers really survived the North Sea. Having settled into the cramped, unsheltered confines of the longship, your journey across the vast, featureless North Atlantic was then compounded by a pervasive and terrifying uncertainty navigation's gamble. Forget reliable maps, accurate compasses, or modern GPS, your path across the immense ocean relied on rudimentary, perilous methods, where getting lost meant a slow, agonizing death, making every voyage profoundly horrifying. Imagine standing on the deck of your longship, hundreds of miles from any land, surrounded by an endless expanse of gray, churning water. Your captain, skipari, or navigator, was a highly skilled individual, possessing generations of accumulated knowledge, but their tools were incredibly primitive compared to today's technology. There was no accurate longitude, no way to precisely determine your east-west position. Your survival hinged on a perilous combination of celestial observation, natural signs, and sheer terrifying luck. It truly sucked to navigate by hope. Your primary methods of navigation relied entirely on the natural world. The sun compass. On clear days, the position of the sun would be your most reliable guide. Vikings likely used a form of sun compass like the Unartok disc, a fragment of a wooden disc found in Greenland that may have functioned as a sun compass or calendrical device or a simple shadow board to determine directions, particularly east and west at sunrise and sunset. Imagine trying to plot your course by observing the sun's faint arc through the clouds or using a simple piece of wood to find your direction, knowing that a miscalculation of even a few degrees could send you hundreds of miles off course, into open ocean or towards uncharted, dangerous coastlines. The Sunstone Solarstein legend and some historical accounts suggest Vikings might have used a sunstone on cloudy days. While the precise nature of these stones is debated, some theories suggest it was a polarized crystal like Icelandic spar that could detect polarized light from the sun, even when the sun itself was obscured by clouds. If effective, it would allow them to locate the sun's position and thus determine direction. Imagine pulling out a mystical stone on a heavily overcast day, desperately hoping it would reveal the sun's hidden location, your life hanging on its ethereal glimmer. It truly sucked to have your GPS be a magic crystal. Stars at night, on clear evenings, the stars, particularly Polaris, the North Star, would provide a crucial guide for maintaining a northerly bearing. However, this required clear skies, which were often rare in the notoriously cloudy North Atlantic. Winds and currents. A deep understanding of prevailing winds and ocean currents was vital. Norse sailors meticulously observed the direction and strength of the wind, the patterns of waves, and the flow of currents, using this intuitive knowledge to aid their navigation and calculate drift. This knowledge was hard-won over generations of perilous voyages. Migration birds, particularly seabirds like gulls or gannets, were invaluable guides. If you were far from land and saw land-dwelling seabirds, you knew land was relatively close. The direction they flew at dawn and dusk could indicate the nearest coast. Vikings sometimes even carried ravens on board, releasing them to fly towards land, hoping to follow their direction, though this practice is more famously associated with earlier Polynesian navigation, whales and seaweed. The presence of certain types of whales or floating seaweed, like those found near Iceland or Greenland, could indicate the proximity of land or specific sea lanes. The lack of precise longitude determination was a critical limitation. While they could estimate latitude, their north-south position by observing the height of the sun at noon or Polaris at night, there was no way to accurately determine longitude, their east-west position. This meant that even if you knew you were at the correct latitude for, say, Greenland, you could be hundreds of miles to the east or west of your intended destination, requiring immense luck to hit your target. Imagine sailing at the correct height for weeks, constantly scanning the horizon, hoping you would eventually hit land. A terrifying lottery where failure meant sailing endlessly into the open ocean. The risk of getting hopelessly lost was immense and often fatal. if storms obscured the sun and stars for days, if currents pushed you off course, or if you simply miscalculated. Your longship could drift aimlessly into the vast, open Atlantic, far from any known land. Your precious provisions would dwindle, your fresh water would run out, and your crew would succumb to starvation, thirst, or exposure, dying slowly and agonizingly, their fate unknown to the world. Many longships, with their ambitious crews, simply vanished without a trace, becoming ghost stories for future generations. It truly sucked to be lost at sea forever. The psychological toll of this constant uncertainty would be immense. You would live with perpetual anxiety, constantly scanning the horizon, perpetually looking for signs, forever calculating your position, the fear of missing your destination, of running out of supplies, or of being swallowed by the endless ocean, would gnaw at your peace of mind. Sleep would be restless, plagued by nightmares of being adrift in an empty, indifferent sea. This relentless mental strain, this constant battle against the terrifying unknown, would erode your spirit, leaving you perpetually vigilant, exhausted, and often desperate. Your compass was hope, and hope was often fleeting. The unpredictability of the weather, as discussed in Chapter 1, exacerbated these navigational challenges. A sudden storm could throw you wildly off course, and prolonged periods of cloud cover or fog could deny you the celestial observations crucial for plotting your path. You were perpetually at the mercy of the elements, making every navigational decision a desperate gamble against natural forces that defied prediction. One common misconception is that Viking navigation was entirely primitive or based on pure guesswork, while it lacked modern instruments. Viking navigators possessed a sophisticated body of empirical knowledge, accumulated over centuries of seafaring, relying on meticulous observation of natural phenomena. They understood currents, prevailing winds, and celestial movements for their latitude. However, their limitations in determining longitude remained a critical challenge for true open ocean crossings. The sagas often describe the skill and luck involved in reaching distant lands, highlighting the difficulty even for experienced navigators. Historians still meticulously study archaeological findings Gagja is, the Unartok disk, fragmentary ship remains, Old Norse sagas, which often detail sea voyages and navigation, and experimental archaeology like modern Viking ship replicas, attempting ancient routes to understand the precise methods and astounding capabilities, as well as the inherent limitations, of Viking navigation, confirming its blend of skill and high risk. Furthermore, the lack of communication with any land-based authority or other ships, as explored in a previous episode about Silk Road merchants. Chapter 8, the principle applies here too, meant that if you got lost or suffered a mishap, there was no one to call for help. Your survival depended entirely on your own resilience and resourcefulness. This profound isolation in the vastness of the ocean, knowing no rescue would come, amplified the terror of being lost. The economic implications of getting lost were also devastating. A failed voyage due to navigational error meant the loss of your ship, your precious cargo, and your entire investment, potentially bankrupting your family or your community. The search for new lands and trade routes was a high-stakes venture, and navigational precision was directly linked to financial survival. This constant financial pressure added another layer of anxiety to your already perilous journey. The reliance on the sagas as navigation guides also presented a unique, terrifying challenge. Sagas like the Landnámabók Book of Settlements provided directions for finding Iceland and Greenland, but these descriptions, while helpful, were often vague by modern standards. Sail west from Norway until you hit land was common advice, while this might suffice for relatively close. Large landmasses, precise navigation to specific fjords or small islands required immense skill and considerable luck, making every approach to a new coast a moment of intense anxiety and potential disaster. So, your journey as a Viking explorer was profoundly defined by navigation's gamble. Your path across the immense, unpredictable North Atlantic relied on primitive, perilous methods, where celestial observation and natural signs offered unreliable guidance. This constant uncertainty, where getting lost meant a slow, agonizing death from starvation and exposure, was a defining, profoundly horrifying aspect of how Viking explorers really survived the North Sea. Even as your longship battled the monstrous North Sea and you gambled with primitive navigation, your very survival on long voyages was constantly under assault from another pervasive misery, food, and water scarcity. Forget abundant, fresh provisions. Your sustenance was monotonous, often contaminated, and constantly threatened by spoilage and slow starvation, making every voyage profoundly horrifying. Imagine your daily meal aboard the longship. Week after week, as you ventured further into the open ocean, your diet was incredibly basic, designed solely for long-term preservation and high caloric density, not for variety or culinary delight. Your primary provisions would be hardtack dried biscuits. This was the absolute staple. Imagine thick, hard, dry biscuits made from coarse flour, baked until they were rock hard to prevent spoilage. You would gnaw on these for every meal, often soaking them in water or ale to make them marginally edible. They were bland, tasteless, and provided minimal nutritional variety, but they were calorie-dense and lasted indefinitely. It truly sucked to literally eat rocks for dinner every single day. Salted or dried meat-fish. Fresh meat was impossible on long voyages instead. You would consume heavily salted pork or beef or incredibly tough dried fish, stockfish. These were vital protein sources, but their preservation methods rendered them almost unpalatable. Salted meat was intensely salty, requiring constant water to counteract, and dried fish was often as hard as wood, needing to be pounded or soaked for hours before it could be chewed. Imagine the constant, pervasive saltiness that permeated every bite, leaving you perpetually thirsty and craving fresh tastes. It truly sucked to chew perpetually on jerky that tasted like a salt lick. Fermented dairy, if available, hard, salted cheeses or dried. Fermented skyr, a yogurt-like product might be carried. These provided some fat and protein, but their flavors were strong and sour, contributing to the overall monotony. Ale or mead, while also a beverage. Weak ale or mead was consumed with almost every meal. It provided calories and, crucially, a safer alternative to often contaminated water sources, as we'll discuss. This diet was profoundly monotonous. You would eat essentially the same few items, day in and day out, for weeks or months. The lack of fresh fruits and vegetables was total. This chronic deprivation led to severe and widespread nutritional deficiencies, which became terrifying killers on long voyages. Scurvy, vitamin C deficiency. This was the most feared and devastating disease for Viking explorers, as it was for all ancient and medieval sailors. Without any fresh produce, your body would slowly, agonizingly, break down. Imagine your gums bleeding profusely, your teeth loosening and falling out, old wounds reopening and refusing to heal. Your limbs would swell painfully, your joints would ache, and you would suffer from profound, debilitating fatigue, your body literally disintegrating from the inside out. Scurvy was a slow, agonizing death, a pervasive misery that could incapacitate an entire crew, turning a powerful longship into a drifting coffin. It truly sucked to literally rot from the inside out because you couldn't get an orange. Anemia, iron deficiency, the scarcity of red meat and fresh greens would lead to widespread anemia, causing chronic fatigue, profound weakness, dizziness, and shortness of breath. Your body's ability to carry oxygen would be severely compromised, leaving you constantly drained and susceptible to other illnesses. General malnutrition, your diet, while calorically dense, lacked the broader spectrum of micronutrients. This contributed to overall physical weakness, a compromised immune system, and increased susceptibility to infectious diseases like dysentery that thrived in unsanitary shipboard conditions. Water scarcity and contamination were perhaps the most immediate and terrifying threats. Fresh water was a critical, yet highly perishable, commodity. You would carry water in wooden casks or leather flasks, but these supplies were finite and would quickly deplete, especially in warmer climates or if your voyage was prolonged by storms. Finding reliable, uncontaminated water sources at sea was impossible, and even when reaching land like Iceland or Greenland, natural sources could be scarce or contaminated by wild animals. Stale and contaminated. Water stored in wooden casks for weeks or months would become stale, developing an unpleasant taste and odor. More dangerously, it could become contaminated by bacteria, algae, or fungi, turning it into a vector for deadly diseases like dysentery, the bloody flux. Imagine your agonizing thirst, your lips cracked, your throat parched, knowing that every sip of murky, foul-smelling water might bring you relentless diarrhea, debilitating fever, and rapid dehydration. You were perpetually gambling your life with every mouthful of liquid. It truly sucked to be thirsty, but fear the water. Rationing. When water supplies ran low, strict rationing would be enforced. You might receive only a few meager sips per day, just enough to prevent immediate death, but condemning you to constant, agonizing thirst, further weakening your body and spirit. This desperate deprivation added another layer of profound physical and psychological torment. The crude methods of food preservation exacerbated these dangers. Without modern refrigeration or airtight packaging, spoilage was a constant, unseen enemy. Grains could become infested with weevils, dried meat could rot, and stored provisions could spoil if exposed to dampness or heat. You would simply have to consume what was available, often holding your nose, knowing that every bite carried a risk of food poisoning or illness. Your reliance on these methods meant your food was perpetually at risk, and your health was always in jeopardy. It truly sucked to have your survival rely on rotten food. The psychological toll of perpetual hunger, thirst, and the fear of spoiled food and debilitating illness was immense. Your mind would be perpetually consumed by the search for sustenance, leading to a profound sense of anxiety and desperation. The knowledge that a single spoiled ration or a sip of tainted water could lead to agonizing illness and even death, far from any help, would make every act of eating and drinking a source of profound dread. This constant vigilance, this relentless worry about your dwindling supplies and your body's slow decay would erode your peace of mind, transforming your ambitious voyage into a grueling, never-ending ordeal of survival against biological threats. One common misconception is that Viking explorers always had abundant food supplies for their long voyages, or that their diets were particularly robust, while their ship designs allowed for significant cargo capacity, including provisions. The challenges of long-term food preservation for large crews, especially fresh produce, were immense. Their diet, while calorically sufficient to prevent immediate starvation, was almost universally monotonous and nutritionally deficient, leading to pervasive illnesses like scurvy. Archaeological findings from Viking Age ship burials like the Oseberg and Gokstad ships, which contain remnants of food stores and animal bones, and analysis of human skeletal remains from Viking settlements consistently confirm a diet heavily reliant on preserved foods and prone to deficiencies during long voyages or lean seasons. Historians still meticulously study paleodietary evidence, GGs, bone isotope analysis of food remnants in ship finds, and Old Norse sagas, which sometimes describe hardship and food shortages on voyages to understand the precise dietary realities and nutritional challenges faced by Viking explorers, confirming the pervasive nature of scarcity and deficiency at sea. Furthermore, the lack of any effective medical intervention for severe nutritional deficiencies or foodborne illnesses at sea was almost absolute if you contracted scurvy. There were no vitamin supplements you would simply waste away agonizingly. If you suffered from dysentery, your body would dehydrate rapidly. With no intravenous fluids or antibiotics, your survival depended entirely on your body's inherent resilience and immense luck. This medical impotence, combined with the continuous dietary inadequacies, ensured your body's slow, agonizing decline, making the journey a grim countdown to death. The very success of Viking exploration, reaching distant lands like Greenland and North America, paradoxically depended on their ability to endure these extreme conditions. Their voyages were not comfortable. They were brutal tests of endurance against biological and environmental adversaries, with a high human cost paid in suffering, illness, and death. Their spirit of exploration was fueled by a desperate need for resources, new lands, or plunder, often at immense personal sacrifice. The psychological toll of constantly battling hidden hungers, unseen contaminants, and the visible wasting of your own body, while simultaneously navigating monstrous seas and facing other perils, would be immense. You were perpetually caught in a cycle of physical deprivation and psychological anxiety, where even the act of eating, meant to sustain you, was a constant source of dread and discomfort. Your body was a living testament to the brutal compromises necessary for survival on the open ocean. So, your journey as a Viking explorer was profoundly horrifying due to food and water scarcity, spoilage, and pervasive contamination. Your monotonous diet of hardtack and preserved meats led to devastating nutritional deficiencies like scurvy, while unreliable and often contaminated water sources posed constant threats of deadly illness. This pervasive dietary peril, ensuring every meal was a terrifying gamble with your health and your life, was a defining, profoundly miserable aspect of how Viking explorers really survived the North Sea, even as your body struggled with the squalor of longship life and the insidious dangers of contaminated food. Your existence as a Viking explorer was a constant, losing fight against the endless cold. Forget temperate seas and predictable warmth, the relentless chill, pervasive dampness, and blinding fog that plagued every journey across the ocean made your survival profoundly horrifying. Imagine the pervasive chill that would seep into your bones from the moment you set sail. The North Sea and the North Atlantic are notoriously frigid, even in summer. The water itself, vast and dark, radiated a constant cold that penetrated your very being. This wasn't merely discomfort, it was a relentless, insidious assault on your body that continuously threatened your survival. Your clothing, typically made of thick wool or coarse linen, while providing some warmth when dry, offered limited protection against the constant dampness and biting winds. Your longship, being primarily an open-decked vessel, as discussed in Chapter 2, offered no real enclosed shelter for the crew to escape the elements. You would be perpetually exposed to relentless, biting winds. The wind, a vital force for propelling your square sail, was also a constant tormentor. It would cut through your clothing, chilling you to the bone, and carrying blinding sea spray that stung your eyes and chafed your skin. Imagine the wind whistling ceaselessly past your ears, a constant howl that eroded your body heat and added to the profound sense of isolation. Driving rain and sea spray waves would constantly crash over the bow and sides, drenching you and everything on board. You would be perpetually wet, your rough woolen clothing clinging uncomfortably to your skin, slowly leaching away your precious body heat. Drying out was often impossible for weeks on end, leading to chronic chills, clammy skin, and profound misery. The dampness would seep into your very bones, making sleep elusive and every movement stiff and aching. Freezing temperatures, even outside of storms. The air and water temperatures of the North Atlantic were perpetually cold, often hovering just above or below freezing, especially on voyages to Iceland or Greenland. Prolonged exposure to these frigid temperatures, exacerbated if you were wet or exhausted, led to constant risk of hypothermia. Your body would shiver uncontrollably, your limbs would grow numb, and your core temperature would drop, leading to confusion, exhaustion, and often silent death during sleep. Imagine your fingers going stiff with cold, making it almost impossible to grip an oar or a rope, your body perpetually aching from the pervasive chill, your lips turning blue. It truly sucked to be perpetually soaked and frozen. Frostbite your exposed fingers, toes, nose, and ears were constantly at risk of frostbite. Where tissue freezes and dies, this could lead to excruciating pain, blackened, dead tissue, and the permanent loss of digits, fingers, toes, crippling you for life and rendering you unable to work effectively or even perform basic tasks. Imagine the horror of seeing a shipmate's toes turn black, knowing their future was one of disfigurement and limited function. It really sucked to literally lose your digits to the cold. Beyond the cold, fog and low visibility were constant. Terrifying companions? Dense fogs were common, particularly near ice-filled waters or in areas where warm and cold currents met. Imagine sailing for days in a thick, blinding fog. Visibility reduced to mere feet. This made navigation incredibly dangerous, increasing the risk of running aground on hidden reefs, colliding with unseen icebergs which were prevalent in northern waters, as explored in Chapter 1, or simply becoming hopelessly lost in the vast, featureless ocean. The constant tension of blindly navigating, relying on your ears more than your eyes to detect unseen dangers, would be immense, consuming precious supplies and leading to profound despair. It truly sucked to be perpetually blind at sea. Your only shelter aboard the longship might be a simple canvas tent or a hide awning stretched over a central part of the deck. This offered minimal protection from wind and rain, and certainly no insulation from the extreme cold. At night, you and your shipmates would huddle together, sharing what little warmth you could generate, but also sharing dampness and any circulating illnesses, creating a cramped, miserable, and often ineffective sleeping environment. True restorative sleep, vital for endurance, was elusive. Was the physical toll of constant exposure to these elements was immense and cumulative. Your skin would be raw from salt spray and windburn, prone to cracking and infection. Your hands would be chapped, blistered, and perpetually numb with cold, making every task agonizing. Your body would ache from constant bracing against the ship's movements and the relentless demands of rowing or managing sails in extreme conditions. Chronic fatigue, exacerbated by severe sleep deprivation in rough seas, would constantly gnaw at your resilience, making you more susceptible to illness like scurvy. As discussed in Chapter 4, and accidents, turning you into a weary, perpetually suffering individual? The psychological impact of living under such unpredictable and terrifying environmental conditions was equally profound. The constant fear of storms, of being lost in blinding fog, of running into unseen ice, or of simply succumbing to the cold and exhaustion would create a pervasive sense of anxiety and dread. Your mind would be perpetually on edge, hyper-vigilant, scanning the horizon for signs of trouble, perpetually trying to assess dangers that defied human control. This relentless mental strain, coupled with the profound physical discomfort, would erode your peace of mind, leading to profound despair, melancholy, or a chilling fatalism. Your voyage was not just a physical journey, it was a profound psychological ordeal, a continuous test of your courage and your sanity against the indifferent, or actively malevolent, forces of the sea. It truly sucked to be perpetually terrified. One common misconception is that Viking longships were perfectly adapted to all conditions of the open North Atlantic and offered complete protection. While longships were remarkably seaworthy for their time, their open, flexible, and shallow draft design, optimizing speed and maneuverability for coastal raiding and river travel, meant a significant sacrifice of crew comfort and protection from the elements on long-distance ocean voyages. The very features that made them excellent raiding vessels made them brutal living spaces in rough, cold seas. This fundamental design trade-off, prioritizing function over comfort and safety in extreme conditions, directly contributed to the harsh conditions endured by explorers. Historians still meticulously study archaeological findings of Viking longships like the Oseberg, Gokstad, and Skoldilev ships, analyzing their design, construction, and the absence of dedicated living quarters or extensive deck coverings for crew protection, as well as Old Norse sagas like the Grenlandinga saga and Eric the Red's saga, which vividly describe terrifying storms, ice encounters, and harrowing voyages to understand the precise living conditions and challenges faced by crews on long-distance voyages, confirming the extreme discomfort and dangers. Furthermore, the limited technological means to mitigate these threats exacerbated your vulnerability. You had no modern weather forecast to plan ahead, no radar to detect icebergs, no sophisticated rescue services, and no effective heating systems beyond small braziers that were often impractical or dangerous on an open deck. This reliance on rudimentary technology meant that your survival was often a matter of immense resilience, sheer physical endurance, and terrifying luck. Rather than systematic control over your environment, the very sea, raw and untamed, mirrored the inherent danger of your existence. The impact on your animals, if any were carried, was also profound. Livestock, if transported, would suffer immensely from the cold, dampness, and constant motion, often succumbing to exposure or disease, representing a significant loss of precious resources for the settlers. Their suffering would be a constant, grim reminder of the brutality of the journey. The danger of drowning or capsizing was ever present, a rogue wave washing over the deck. A sudden shift in cargo or a structural weakness in the hull could cause your longship to flip over, throwing you into the frigid, open water. Drowning or succumbing to hypothermia in minutes would be an instant, horrifying end, with little to no chance of rescue from the vast, indifferent ocean. Your life could be extinguished in a terrifying, chaotic instant. Far from any land or help, your body simply disappearing into the icy depths. So, your journey as a Viking explorer was profoundly defined by the endless cold, the pervasive sub-zero temperatures, the relentless winds, the constant dampness, the blinding fog, and the lurking icebergs conspired to make every voyage a continuous, brutal battle for survival against the unforgiving forces of nature. This pervasive environmental hostility, ensuring every moment was a struggle for warmth and continued existence, was a defining, profoundly horrifying aspect of how Viking explorers really survived the North Sea, even as your body struggled against the relentless cold and the pervasive dampness of the longship. Your daily existence as a Viking explorer was profoundly defined by its cramped quarters. Forget spacious cabins or personal privacy. You were packed into unsanitary, overcrowded spaces below deck, enduring a constant assault of filth, sickness, and profound physical strain that made every voyage profoundly horrifying. Imagine your living situation aboard the longship for weeks, sometimes months, on end. A Viking longship, a masterpiece of ancient shipbuilding designed for speed and maneuverability, was fundamentally an open-decked vessel. There was no enclosed cabin below deck for the entire crew to reside in. Instead, the limited, often damp space below the thwarts, rowing benches, and in the holds was primarily for cargo, supplies, and ballast. You and your shipmates dozens, sometimes over 100 men for larger vessels like the Orman Lange or similar warships would be packed tightly into incredibly confined quarters. It truly sucked to live in a human sardine can. Your berth might be a shared bench, a small section of the deck often covered only by a simple canvas tent or hide-awning, offering minimal protection from the elements, or simply whatever space you could find amidst coiled ropes, spare oars, and cargo. Privacy was utterly non-existent. You would be constantly surrounded by your shipmates, their unwashed bodies, their loud conversations, their snoring, and the pervasive smells of the ship itself. Every aspect of your life, eating, sleeping, resting, performing basic bodily functions, was conducted in the immediate, unavoidable presence of your peers. Imagine trying to find a moment of personal solace or quiet sleep in such a suffocatingly public, confined space, constantly disturbed by the movements and sounds of dozens of other men. It truly sucked to have your entire life be a public performance in a small box. The sanitation on board was appalling, and a constant source of misery and disease. There were no proper latrines or flushing toilets. Human waste would often be discharged directly into the sea from a designated head area at the bow, the very front of the ship, or collected in communal buckets that were haphazardly and infrequently emptied, leading to constant contamination of the ship's decks and internal spaces. Fresh water, a precious commodity on long voyages, was hoarded for drinking, rarely used for washing bodies, clothes, or even basic utensils. Personal hygiene was minimal, leading to widespread body odor, skin infections exacerbated by constant dampness and friction, and rampant infestations of lice and fleas which thrived in unwashed bodies and clothing. Imagine living for weeks or months in a perpetually damp, dark, and reeking environment, constantly itching, constantly feeling dirty, with no escape from the pervasive filth. This constant exposure to unsanitary conditions turned your home into a breeding ground for deadly diseases. It truly sucked to literally breathe in everyone else's waste, all the time. The air quality below deck was stifling and unhealthy in hot climates. The holds would become stiflingly hot and humid, trapping the smells of unwashed bodies, stale food, and the ship's timbers in rough weather. Hatches and any temporary coverings would be battened down, sealing you in even further, cutting off what little fresh air circulation existed. The constant dampness, combined with poor ventilation, also fostered mold and mildew, contributing to chronic respiratory issues. Breathing freely was a luxury you rarely enjoyed, as the air was thick with the effluvia of human bodies, decaying food, and various shipboard odors. The monotonous and often insufficient diet, as explored in Chapter 4, exacerbated the physical strain and discomfort of cramped quarters. You would subsist on hardtack, salted meat or fish, and stale water or weak ale. Fresh fruits and vegetables were almost non-existent on long voyages, leading to widespread nutritional deficiencies like scurvy, as discussed in Chapter 4, which would cause bleeding gums and overall physical decay. This constant deprivation, coupled with the unsanitary conditions, further weakened your body, making you more susceptible to illness and less resilient against the brutal conditions. The constant motion of the ship added another layer of misery, even in relatively calm seas. The gentle rolling and pitching of the vessel could induce seasickness for some in rough weather. The violent heaving, tossing, and crashing against waves could lead to persistent nausea, vomiting, and profound discomfort, making it impossible to keep food down or find any stable footing. Imagine trying to eat, sleep, or simply exist while your stomach constantly rebelled against the relentless motion, adding to the pervasive smells of the ship. It truly sucked to be perpetually seasick in a packed space. One common misconception is that Viking longships were designed for comfort on long voyages. While they were incredibly effective for their primary purposes, raiding, warfare, and trade over shorter distances or along coasts, their open, flexible, and shallow draft design, optimizing speed and maneuverability, meant a significant sacrifice of crew comfort and protection from the elements on long-distance ocean voyages. They were not built for luxury cruising across vast oceans. They were functional vessels where human endurance was paramount. This fundamental design trade-off, prioritizing military and economic function over crew comfort, directly contributed to the harsh conditions endured by explorers. Historians still meticulously study archaeological findings of Viking longships like the Oseberg, Gokstad, and Skuldelev ships, analyzing their design, construction, and the presence/absence of dedicated living quarters or extensive deck coverings for crew protection, as well as Old Norse sagas, which often describe the harshness of sea voyages and shipboard life, to understand the precise living conditions and challenges faced by crews on long-distance voyages, consistently confirming the extreme discomfort and dangers. Furthermore, the very act of sailing and rowing was incredibly physically demanding. You would spend hours at the oars, battling currents or propelling the ship in calm conditions, managing the large square sail in unpredictable winds, hauling ropes, and bailing water from constant sea spray or rain were continuous, strenuous tasks. This relentless physical exertion, combined with the lack of proper rest, the poor diet, and the constant exposure, led to profound fatigue, muscle aches, and joint strain. Your body was perpetually pushed to its limits, ensuring that every mile gained was paid for with immense physical suffering, further exacerbating the misery of your cramped, unsanitary living conditions. The cold water of the North Atlantic presented a constant threat, a rogue wave washing over the deck, or an accidental fall overboard, could quickly lead to death by hypothermia, even for strong swimmers. Given the frigid temperatures of the ocean, this constant proximity to the cold, lethal water added another layer of inherent danger to your already brutal existence. ensuring that a single misstep or a moment of weakness could mean instant oblivion, your body quickly succumbing to the cold and sinking into the dark depths. The psychological toll of living in such cramped, unsanitary, and perpetually uncomfortable conditions would be immense. You would battle constant physical discomfort, pervasive odors, the irritation of parasites, and chronic fatigue. The complete lack of privacy, the inability to escape your shipmates, or the oppressive environment would erode your peace of mind. This relentless physical and sensory assault, combined with the constant threat of danger from storms, icebergs, or getting lost, would lead to profound irritability, despondency, and a general sense of misery, transforming your ambitious voyage into a continuous test of endurance against your own body and its immediate claustrophobic surroundings. You were a prisoner of your own journey, trapped in a wooden box with no escape. The absence of any effective medical care, as discussed in Chapter 4, meant that sickness, once it entered the crowded confines, spread like wildfire. A single sick individual with dysentery or scurvy could rapidly infect the entire crew, turning the longship into a floating hospital, and then a floating coffin. The cramped quarters ensured rapid contagion, making illness an even greater threat in this confined environment. So, your journey as a Viking explorer was profoundly defined by your longship's cramped quarters, the complete lack of shelter, constant exposure to extreme weather, pervasive filth and unsanitary conditions, meager diet, and relentless physical demands transformed your vessel into a cramped, miserable prison. This brutal endurance test, ensuring every moment at sea was a physical and psychological battle against claustrophobia, squalor, and profound discomfort, was a defining, profoundly horrifying aspect of how Viking explorers really survived the North Sea. Even as your body struggled with the endless cold and the suffocating confines of the longship, your Viking exploration was constantly plagued by an even more insidious and pervasive enemy disease's scourge. Forget battle wounds or shipwrecks. Invisible killers like scurvy, dysentery, and other rampant illnesses claimed more lives at sea than any other danger, making your long voyages profoundly horrifying. Imagine the constant dread that would settle over you with every cough from a shipmate, every sudden fever among the crew, or every ache in your own body. In the Viking Age, illness was not an exception. It was a daily reality, claiming countless lives during long sea voyages. Your body, perpetually under stress from hard labor rowing, sailing, poor diet, and extreme exposure, had a severely compromised immune system. Your defenses were utterly depleted, leaving you a prime target for every pathogen circulating on board. It truly sucked to be perpetually vulnerable to invisible killers on a boat. The sources of illness on a Viking longship were manifold and constantly present. Scurvy vitamin C deficiency. This was the most feared and devastating disease for Viking explorers, as it was for all ancient and medieval sailors on long voyages. Without access to fresh fruits and vegetables, which were impossible to carry for weeks or months at sea, your body would slowly, agonizingly, break down. Imagine your gums bleeding profusely, your teeth loosening and falling out, old wounds reopening and refusing to heal. Your limbs would swell painfully, your joints would ache, and you would suffer from profound, debilitating fatigue, your body literally disintegrating from the inside out. Scurvy was a slow, agonizing death, a pervasive misery that could incapacitate an entire crew, turning a powerful longship into a drifting coffin, its crew too weak to sail or even bail water, It truly sucked to literally rot from the inside out because you couldn't get an orange. Dysentery, the bloody flux. This was another common and devastating killer. It was caused by contaminated food and water, which were rampant on long sea voyages. Water stored in wooden casks for weeks or months would become stale, then putrid, and easily contaminated by bacteria. Hardtack and dried meat, if improperly preserved or stored, could also harbor pathogens. Consuming this contaminated food or water led to severe diarrhea, agonizing abdominal cramps, relentless vomiting, and rapid dehydration. You would waste away in a matter of days or weeks, your body consumed by the relentless purging, leaving you too weak to resist other infections. Imagine your body racked by cramps and constant purging, rapidly dehydrating, knowing every sip of murky, foul-smelling water might bring you closer to a painful, undignified end. It really sucked to be sick without no toilet. Respiratory illnesses, the harsh, cold, and damp conditions on an open-decked longship, combined with extreme exposure and crowded sleeping arrangements, if any were available below deck, made respiratory ailments chronic. Colds would swiftly escalate into severe bronchitis, pneumonia, or pleurisy, especially in bodies weakened by cold, fatigue, and malnutrition. The pervasive dampness and cold air constantly attacked your lungs, leading to agonizing coughs and labored breathing that could rapidly become fatal in a world without modern medicine. Other fevers and infections. Various other undiagnosed viral and bacterial infections would sweep through the crew, especially when interacting with diverse populations during raids or trade. Minor cuts or abrasions from ropes, tools, or rough surfaces would easily become infected in the unsanitary conditions, leading to local abscesses or, worse, systemic infections like sepsis, blood poisoning, which could quickly turn fatal, spreading rapidly throughout your body and leading to agonizing death. The mortality rate at sea was consistently high for Viking explorers, and disease was often a more significant killer than shipwrecks or combat. You would constantly witness illness sweeping through your shipmates, their bodies wasting away, their suffering agonizing, knowing that the same fate could be yours at any moment. The sick would be isolated if possible, but often remained in close, unsanitary quarters, serving as vectors for further contagion. Your daily existence was a grim countdown, marked by the escalating illness of your companions. It truly sucked to watch everyone die around you from unseen causes. Medical knowledge and care at sea were tragically primitive. Your longship would have no dedicated doctor unless you were on an incredibly rare, large expedition with a specially hired healer. Any medical care would come from rudimentary knowledge among the crew, often basic first aid for wounds using crude bandages or herbal poultices or folk remedies for illnesses. There were no antibiotics, no understanding of germ theory, no sterile instruments, no effective pain management beyond perhaps some strong ale or opium if available. If you fell severely ill, your survival depended entirely on your body's own resilience and immense, terrifying luck. Many resorted to desperate folk remedies, sometimes harmful, in a futile attempt to cling to life, only prolonging their agony. It really sucked to be a patient in the middle of the ocean. The lack of sanitation on board the longship exacerbated all these health risks. Human waste was often haphazardly disposed of. Decks were rarely truly clean beyond a quick rinse with seawater, and fresh water was too precious for washing bodies or clothes. This created a constant breeding ground for diseases and pests, lice, fleas that thrived in the cramped, damp, and dirty environment, ensuring that every pirate was perpetually exposed to sickness. Your living environment was literally trying to kill you. The psychological toll of constantly battling sickness, of watching your shipmates suffer and die from agonizing diseases that you could neither understand nor cure, and of knowing that your own body was always at risk, would be immense. This pervasive atmosphere of illness and death eroded morale, fostered despair, and made every voyage a grim countdown to the inevitable. The fear of contagion, the helplessness in the face of an epidemic, and the knowledge that your body was already weakened by deprivation would leave deep, indelible scars on your psyche. This continuous exposure to suffering, this brutal reality of life constantly threatened by unseen killers, made Viking exploration a profound and horrifying battle where death was a silent, ever-present companion. It truly sucked to be perpetually scared of getting sick. One common misconception is that all Viking explorers were incredibly healthy and robust due to their active lifestyle. In reality, while they were undoubtedly resilient, their diet and unsanitary conditions at sea meant that chronic illness and a high mortality rate were endemic. A significant portion of a longship's crew might be sick or injured at any given time, severely impacting the vessel's effectiveness. Naval records from later eras often show far higher death tolls from disease than from battle, and Viking voyages were no exception. Archaeological studies of Viking age skeletal remains from ship burials, those from the Gokstad and Oseberg ships, showing signs of various illnesses and stress, and analysis of human remains from Viking settlements consistently confirm a diet prone to deficiencies like scurvy and widespread infectious diseases. Historians still meticulously study paleodietary evidence Vajayji. Bone isotope analysis of food, remnants in ship finds, and Old Norse sagas, which sometimes describe hardship and disease on voyages to understand the precise dietary realities, health challenges, and impact of various illnesses on Viking explorers, confirming the pervasive nature of scarcity and deficiency at sea, leading to widespread disease. Furthermore, the limited space on a longship, as discussed in Chapter 2, meant you were constantly in close proximity to your shipmates, sharing their fears, their anxieties, and any illnesses that might sweep through the crew. This communal endurance of hardship, while fostering strong bonds as explored in The Brutal Upbringing and Training of a Spartan Child. Chapter 9, on Comradeship. Similar bonds formed here through shared misery also meant there was no escape from the pervasive atmosphere of struggle and uncertainty that defined your voyage. Your personal misery was amplified by the collective suffering, ensuring that your journey was a constant reminder of shared peril. The cold water of the North Atlantic further exacerbated health issues. Constant exposure to dampness and frigid temperatures could lead to chronic respiratory problems, joint pain, and increased susceptibility to hypothermia. Even without a direct shipwreck, your body was perpetually battling the elements, and this continuous fight contributed to a weakened state, making you an easier target for disease. So, your life as a Viking explorer was profoundly defined by disease's scourge, invisible killers like scurvy, dysentery, and various fevers, exacerbated by unsanitary conditions, poor diet, and harsh exposure on the open sea, claimed more lives than any other danger. This pervasive threat, ensuring your body was perpetually vulnerable to a vast array of pathogens and leading to agonizing death, was a defining, profoundly horrifying aspect of how Viking explorers really survived the North Sea, even as your body fought the insidious spread of disease and your spirit endured the cramped confines of the longship. Your Viking exploration was always haunted by its most terrifying and final threat: shipwreck. Forget heroic last stands, the terrifying reality of your vessel breaking apart, and the slim, agonizing odds of survival. made every long voyage profoundly horrifying. Imagine the terrifying roar of the wind and the crashing waves as a furious North Atlantic storm bears down on your longship as explored in Chapter 1, or perhaps the chilling silence as your ship grinds against a hidden iceberg in the fog as discussed in Chapter 5, or a treacherous underwater reef tears through your hull. The sudden, violent realization that your vessel, your only home and protector on the vast ocean, is breaking apart beneath you would trigger a primal terror that dwarfs all other fears. Your ship, a symbol of your power and freedom, was now your inescapable death trap. It truly sucked to watch your home literally fall apart. The dangers of shipwreck were manifold and often led to swift, brutal ends. Drowning in frigid waters. If your longship capsized or was shattered by waves or ice, you would be plunged into the incredibly cold waters of the North Atlantic. These waters, often near freezing, would induce severe hypothermia within minutes. Your muscles would seize, your body would lose its ability to regulate temperature, and you would rapidly lose consciousness, succumbing to the cold long before you ran out of air. Even if you were a strong swimmer, a skill not universally taught to all Vikings, your heavy woolen clothing would quickly become waterlogged, dragging you down with terrifying speed. Many Viking explorers perished from drowning or hypothermia, their bodies swallowed by the indifferent ocean, never to be recovered. Imagine the agonizing struggle for breath in the freezing water, your limbs growing numb, your strength failing. Knowing rescue was impossible. It truly sucked to literally freeze and drown at the same time. Crushing by debris, as the ship broke apart, you risk being crushed by splintering timbers, heavy cargo, or falling masts. The chaos of a sinking vessel, with its structural components collapsing, meant navigating a deadly maelstrom of wooden shards and heavy objects. A sudden blow could render you unconscious or inflict a fatal injury, sealing your fate even before you hit the water. Exposure on a wreckage. If you managed to cling to a piece of wreckage, a broken mast, or a floating plank, your ordeal would only just begin. You would be utterly exposed to the relentless cold, the biting winds, and the crashing waves. With no hope of shelter, your body would rapidly lose heat. Succumbing to hypothermia, your hands and feet would suffer severe frostbite, turning black and dead as tissue froze. The vastness of the ocean would stretch around you, a terrifying, empty expanse offering no signs of land or rescue. Your slow, agonizing death by exposure, thirst, or starvation would be a prolonged torment, stretching over days or even weeks for the lucky few who survived the initial impact. It truly sucked to die slowly on a raft, with no one to save you. Loss of all supplies. A shipwreck meant the complete loss of all your precious provisions, food, water, tools, and any emergency supplies. This immediately condemned you to starvation and dehydration if you were cast adrift, sealing your fate to a prolonged agony even if you avoided drowning immediately. Your survival was then entirely dependent on finding land swiftly, an almost impossible feat on the vast open ocean. No hope of rescue. Once your ship was lost, there was virtually no hope of rescue. There were no search and rescue operations, no distress signals, and no other ships nearby to respond. The North Atlantic was a vast, empty expanse. If your ship vanished, your fate was sealed. Your existence simply erased from the records, becoming a ghost story for future generations. The frequency of shipwrecks was high. While Viking longships were incredibly seaworthy for their time, they were still vulnerable to the extreme conditions of the North Atlantic. Sagas often recount tales of ships being lost in storms, to ice, or simply vanishing without a trace. highlighting the commonality of maritime disasters. The decision to embark on a long voyage was always a high-stakes gamble, with a significant chance of never returning. It truly sucked to take a vacation knowing you might die. The psychological toll of experiencing a shipwreck, or constantly living under its threat, was immense. The sudden, catastrophic loss of your vessel, the terrifying struggle for survival against overwhelming forces, and the profound helplessness in the face of nature's fury would leave deep, indelible scars on your psyche. You would live with perpetual anxiety, haunted by the memory of the waves, the screams of your shipmates, and the chilling realization of your own near-death experience. This pervasive fear of maritime disaster, even when on land, would make every future voyage a source of dread. You were perpetually aware that your life could be extinguished in an instant. Far from home and family, one common misconception is that all Viking ship burials were the result of planned funerary rites as discussed in Chapter 2, the sacred vessel preparing the ship tomb. In reality, some Viking ship finds may represent actual shipwrecks or burials of ships that foundered at sea, their crews lost, with the ship eventually settling on the seabed and becoming an archaeological site. While deliberate ship burials are famous, accidental losses at sea were also a significant cause of mortality for Viking explorers and traders, and their ships, carrying their crews and cargo, became unintended, waterlogged tombs. The archaeological analysis of some ship finds those found in challenging maritime environments rather than deliberate burial mounds can sometimes provide clues as to whether they were sunk in battle, lost in a storm, or scuttled, offering a grim window into the frequency of such disasters. Historians still meticulously study underwater archaeology of Viking shipwrecks, alongside Norse sagas which often describe terrifying storms, and ships lost at sea, and paleoclimate data which can confirm periods of particularly stormy weather to understand the precise prevalence and impact of shipwrecks on Viking long-distance voyaging. Furthermore, the very nature of Viking expansion into remote territories like Iceland, Greenland, and Vinland was enabled by, but also constantly threatened by, these perilous sea voyages. Your ability to survive, to trade, and to maintain contact with your homeland hinged entirely on the resilience of your longship and your ability to brave the treacherous North Atlantic. A shipwreck, therefore, was not just a personal tragedy, it was a fundamental disruption to the very viability of the entire settlement, potentially severing vital lifelines and condemning isolated communities to a slow, agonizing demise, as we saw in What Sucked About Being a Viking Settler in Greenland. Chapter 8, on abandonment, the unpredictability of the ocean was a constant reminder of your profound vulnerability. You could be the most skilled sailor, your ship the strongest, but a rogue wave, a sudden shift in wind, or a hidden iceberg could seal your fate in an instant. This lack of control over your destiny, this constant submission to the overwhelming power of nature, added another layer of existential dread to your life as an explorer. Your courage was immense, but your ultimate survival was largely a matter of chance. The impact on families back home was immense. A ship that vanished at sea left behind grieving widows and orphan children, living in perpetual uncertainty, clinging to a desperate hope that their loved ones might somehow still be alive, stranded on a distant shore. The silence from a lost voyage was a profound and agonizing torment, far worse than definitive news of death, ensuring that the perils of the sea extended far beyond those who perished within its depths. So, Your journey as a Viking explorer was profoundly defined by the terrifying reality of shipwreck. Your magnificent longship, your only lifeline across the vast, unforgiving North Atlantic, was perpetually vulnerable to violent storms, crushing icebergs and treacherous seas. This constant threat of your vessel breaking apart, leading to drowning, exposure, or desperate, unrescued survival, was a defining, profoundly horrifying aspect of how Viking explorers really survived the North Sea, ensuring that every mile gained was a gamble with your very existence. Even as your longship battled the monstrous North Sea and your body fought for survival against relentless cold, disease, and the constant threat of shipwreck, your spirit was often consumed by a different, more insidious misery, the silent journey. Forget bustling camaraderie or stimulating conversations. Your life at sea was defined by profound isolation, pervasive boredom, and overwhelming despair, making your voyage profoundly horrifying. Imagine the vast, empty expanse of the open ocean. Day after day, week after week, month after month, you would see nothing but the endless horizon, the churning gray water, and the vast, indifferent sky. Your world shrank to the confines of your small longship, a tiny speck in a colossal, unforgiving wilderness. This profound physical isolation, thousands of miles from any familiar land or friendly face, directly contributed to an immense sense of loneliness. It truly sucked to be alone in the middle of nowhere. For weeks on end, the lack of communication with the outside world was absolute. There were no letters, no messengers, no way to know if your family back home was safe, if your settlement was thriving, or if the political landscape had shifted. You were effectively cut off, your past left behind, and your future uncertain. This informational void meant you lived in perpetual uncertainty, relying solely on your memories and the immediate reality of the ship. Imagine the torment of not knowing if your loved ones were alive, or if your home still stood, with no way to send a message or receive news. This profound separation from everything familiar was a constant, gnawing pain. It truly sucked to be perpetually cut off from everyone you loved. The monotony of the journey itself contributed to pervasive boredom. While there were moments of intense physical exertion rowing, managing sails, bailing water, many hours were spent simply waiting for the wind, waiting for the weather to change, waiting for land to appear. The landscape of the ocean, while vast, offered little visual variation. This relentless sameness, the endless repetition of the waves, the sky, and the limited activities on board, could dull your mind and erode your spirit. You might pass the time with storytelling, simple games, or carving wood. But the underlying tedium of endless travel was always present, transforming the journey into a psychological endurance test. It really sucked to be bored to death. This pervasive boredom, coupled with the immense dangers, storms, icebergs, bandits, disease, often led to profound despair. The constant awareness of your precarious mortality, the knowledge that you could die at any moment from a myriad of threats, combined with the isolation and monotony, could break even the strongest spirits. You might succumb to periods of deep melancholy, hopelessness, or apathy, finding it difficult to maintain morale or find meaning in your relentless struggle. This psychological burden was as challenging as any physical hardship, and perhaps even more insidious, slowly consuming your will to survive. It truly sucked to lose hope in the middle of nowhere. Paranoia could also set in. The close quarters, as explored in Chapter 6, The immense stress and the isolation could breed distrust among the crew. You might suspect a shipmate of hoarding rations, of shirking duties, or even of harboring ill intent. Arguments could escalate, fueled by exhaustion and frayed nerves, potentially leading to violence in the cramped confines of the longship. This constant vigilance against internal threats, coupled with the external dangers, would leave you perpetually on edge, unable to truly relax or trust those around you, turning your companions into potential sources of anxiety. It truly sucked to be constantly paranoid. The lack of true privacy, as discussed in Chapter 6, amplified the psychological toll. You were constantly surrounded by your shipmates, without a moment of true solitude or personal retreat. Your thoughts, your fears, your moments of weakness all were potentially observed by others. This constant lack of personal space, combined with the emotional suppression required to maintain morale in such harsh conditions, contributed to a profound sense of claustrophobia and emotional isolation. You were part of a collective, but ultimately, alone in your suffering. It really sucked to literally never be alone. One common misconception is that all Viking explorers were fearless adventurers who reveled in every moment of their voyages. In reality, while their courage and ambition were undeniable, their sagas and archaeological records also hint at the profound hardships and psychological burdens they faced. The sagas often describe instances of despair, illness, and the grim reality of loss at sea. The very fact that specific charms and rituals were developed to ward off despair or ensure safe passage, as explored in The Horrifying Superstitions That Controlled a Viking's Daily Life, suggests a deep-seated anxiety about the psychological challenges of long voyages. Historians still meticulously study Old Norse sagas, which are rich with descriptions of physical and psychological hardship at sea, runic inscriptions, some of which are laments for lost sailors, and archaeological findings from shipwrecks and remote settlements to understand the precise emotional and mental realities of Viking Age exploration, often finding evidence of profound psychological stress and loneliness. Furthermore, the very unpredictability of the North Sea and Atlantic, as discussed in Chapter 1, meant that you were perpetually on alert. A calm sea could turn into a furious storm in a matter of hours, demanding immediate, strenuous action. This constant state of vigilance, this perpetual readiness for disaster, prevented any true peace of mind or deep relaxation. Your nervous system would be constantly strained, ensuring a pervasive sense of underlying tension that never truly dissipated. The lack of clear landmarks during open ocean crossings contributed to the profound boredom and the anxiety of being lost. For days or weeks, the horizon would offer no distinguishing features, making progress seem agonizingly slow. This visual monotony, combined with the absence of external stimuli, could lead to a sense of profound disorientation and existential emptiness, amplifying feelings of despair and detachment from the known world. Your world became a featureless, blue-gray void. The impact on your memory and mental faculties could also be severe over long, monotonous voyages. The lack of varied stimulation, coupled with sleep deprivation and physical exhaustion, could lead to a dulled mind, difficulty concentrating, and perhaps even minor hallucinations or delusions in extreme cases of isolation and dehydration. Your senses, constantly assaulted by the same few stimuli, might begin to play tricks on you, blurring the lines between reality and imagination. So, your journey as a Viking explorer was consumed by the silent journey, the profound isolation from home and companionship, the pervasive boredom of endless open water, the constant paranoia stemming from shared confinement and ever-present threats, and the soul-crushing despair born from relentless uncertainty, all combined to make every mile a psychological battlefield. This profound, insidious erosion of your peace of mind, ensuring your sanity was perpetually tested by the relentless solitude of the sea, was a defining, profoundly horrifying aspect of how Viking explorers really survived the North Sea. You've endured the fickle fury of the North Sea, suffered the profound miseries of the longship, gambled with primitive and perilous navigation methods, battled the constant threat of scurvy and starvation, struggled against the relentless cold and pervasive dampness, suffered in cramped and unsanitary quarters, fought the insidious scourge of disease, faced the terrifying reality of shipwreck, and grappled with the soul-crushing despair of the silent journey. As the distant sounds of the waves fade and the phantom chill of the open ocean finally dissipates, a profound, lingering truth settles upon you. Viking exploration was not just a saga of triumph. It was a brutal, relentless battle against nature, claiming countless lives for fleeting glory and leaving a legacy of profound tragedy and untold suffering. A brutal reality, triumph forged in torment. Consider the fundamental brutality that defined every aspect of your voyage. Your body, perpetually exposed to the elements, was battered by violent storms, gnawed by relentless cold, and withered by pervasive dampness and frostbite. Your sustenance was a constant struggle against scarcity, relying on monotonous hardtack and dried fish that often led to debilitating scurvy and other nutritional deficiencies. Every mile was a physical torment. Every day a test of endurance against conditions that pushed human limits to their breaking point. It truly sucked to have your body be a casualty of every journey. Perpetual peril, dance with death. Then there's the unrelenting danger that stalked your every moment at sea. The North Atlantic was a monstrous adversary. Its unpredictable storms, lurking icebergs, and vast, featureless expanse constantly threatening to swallow your ship. Primitive navigation made getting lost a terrifying certainty, leading to slow, agonizing death by starvation or exposure. Shipwrecks were a common, horrifying reality, often ending in drowning in frigid waters or desperate, prolonged struggle on open wreckage. This constant dance with peril, where death lurked around every cresting wave, ensured that survival was always a miracle, not a guarantee. You were constantly in harm's way, the unseen enemy, disease, and squalor. And what about the insidious threat of disease? Your longship, a functional marvel, was also a floating incubator of pathogens. Cramped, unsanitary quarters, contaminated water, and a diet devoid of fresh produce led to rampant outbreaks of scurvy, dysentery, and respiratory illnesses that claimed more lives than any storm or enemy blade. The lack of effective medical care meant agonizing suffering and inevitable death for many. Transforming your vessel into a grim hospital ship, this pervasive, unseen enemy made your every breath a gamble and every moment a battle against invisible killers. It truly sucked to be sick with no one to cure you. A crushing mental toll, isolation, and despair, finally. The profound psychological burden. Your voyage was a silent journey, defined by crushing isolation from home and loved ones, stretching for months on end. The relentless monotony of the open ocean bred deep boredom, often giving way to profound despair. Constant anxiety about storms, ice, and getting lost, coupled with the pervasive fear of disease and death, fueled paranoia and eroded your peace of mind. You battled loneliness, homesickness, and a chilling sense of being utterly cut off, transforming your ambitious exploration into a relentless psychological ordeal. It truly sucked to lose your mind in the middle of nowhere. The saga of survival, a legacy forged in hardship. The overall reality of Viking exploration paints a picture far removed from simplistic romanticizations. It was a period of immense courage and extraordinary achievement, reaching distant lands like Iceland, Greenland, and North America, forging new trade routes and establishing settlements. However, these triumphs were forged in a crucible of immense human suffering. The strength of the Viking explorers was born not of comfort, but of the sheer tenacity to survive on so little. Against so much, their voyages were a testament to their unparalleled resilience, but they came with a heavy, horrifying price paid in constant suffering, illness, and widespread death. Unsung heroes. The cost of global connection, one particularly poignant and often overlooked. Detail is the anonymous nature of much of this suffering. While sagas celebrate the named chieftains and famous explorers, the vast majority of the crew, the common sailors and adventurers who endured the bulk of these horrifying conditions, remain unnamed. Their contributions absorbed into the collective effort, their personal stories of battling scurvy, surviving storms, or dying of hypothermia in a remote fjord are lost to history, overshadowed by the grandeur of the overall achievement. The success of Viking expansion and the establishment of new colonies were built on the unacknowledged suffering and high mortality rates of these countless, unnamed individuals. Their bravery was immense, but their ultimate legacy was often silence. Their bodies swallowed by the sea or buried in unmarked graves in distant lands. Historians still meticulously study archaeological findings from Viking Age shipwrecks and remote settlement sites, analyzing skeletal remains for evidence of trauma, disease, and nutritional deficiencies, striving to give voice to these unsung, suffering explorers, and to reconstruct the precise human cost of their monumental achievements. Ultimately, your experience of how Viking explorers really survived the North Sea reveals a profound truth about human exploration. It was a life defined by a constant, brutal battle against an unforgiving environment, pervasive disease, relentless danger, and profound psychological isolation. Every mile gained was a testament to unimaginable endurance, but it was a journey profoundly horrifying, marked by immense suffering and the pervasive threat of an early, often agonizing, and anonymous end. The glory of Viking exploration was inseparable from its terrifying human cost, ensuring that their saga of discovery was also a saga of brutal, relentless survival. As you now drift into a deep, comforting sleep, let the distant sounds of ancient waves and the imagined struggles of a short, brutal life at sea finally subside. You are safe in your own time, far removed from the perils and hardships of the past. May your dreams be peaceful, filled with the quiet certainty of safety, warmth, abundant food, and the profound freedom to explore a world where adventure no longer demands such horrifying sacrifices. A stark contrast to the horrifying truth we've explored tonight. And now, good night, and have sweet dreams.